Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. So in today's episode, we have Valentina Milanova. Valentina's educational background is in law and economics. She started her career in early-stage startup investing before founding Daye. A year and a half after raising a seed round for Daye as a single-person business, Valentina's team set up production for their clinically validated naked and CBD tampons in South London. Daye is on a mission to raise the standards in women's health, starting by bridging the gender pain gap with their first product. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
So let's start off by getting into the story of your first period. It's the first question I ask all of my guests. So can you share with us what happened?
I had my first period when I was really young, so I didn't know that what I was experiencing was menstruation. I assumed that I had contracted some kind of a disease, and I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone around me. So my first few periods felt very traumatic. They kind of came out of nowhere, and because I wasn't anticipating them to be there every month. And I would just lock myself in the bathroom and kind of agonize over what I perceived was my imminent death from this horrible disease that I had. And then I gradually learned what was happening to my body and what I was experiencing. And then I started navigating how to deal with my menstruation. So I always had really painful periods, kind of debilitating cramps where I would have to just lie in a hot tub or take a really hot shower to reduce the cramps. And I also had a really heavy period, which meant that most pads really didn't do it for me in terms of absorbency. So I would always kind of have my trousers stained when I was at school. I remember we had these white chairs in school, white plastic chairs that were just my nightmare, because every day at school when I was menstruating, I was just so worried that I was going to stand up and find just a little pond of my menstrual blood.
How old were you when you got your first period?
I was 9. I had my first period really early.
9 years old. Okay, so you were in year 5, year 4, year 5?
I'm Bulgarian, so we have a different system of.
Oh, right.
Education.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were quite young.
I was young, yeah.
So who did you talk to when you thought you had a disease and it was really traumatic? Who did you turn to?
I didn't turn to anyone. I just was really worried that what I had was very, very shameful. It was about a year after I had my first period that I finally mustered the courage to go up to my father and just admit that there was something wrong with what I thought then was something wrong with me. And he actually didn't realize what was going on either. So we ended up making a trip to the emergency clinic to see a doctor for this mysterious bleeding that I was experiencing.
And when you went to the emergency clinic, what did they say?
They laughed it off. They found it really funny, and they said, "Well, it's just your period. It's just your menstruation." But I was like, "What is menstruation? Like, what does this mean?" It's like, this is not helpful. What does this term mean? So, and I just felt really uncomfortable to ask any questions, but my father understood what that meant, and we went to the supermarket and we bought a bunch of pads, and he gave me the pads and half-heartedly showed me how to use the pads. And then I read the instructions on the box of the pads. And then it wasn't until a few years later that my friends at school started having their periods. And I remember when I first found out that there was another girl in my class that also had her period, I was so happy and so relieved, and I couldn't wait to show her the ropes and talk to her about the different kinds of period care that I used and how to change your pad and things like that.
So for the first three or 4 years, you were on your own with a little bit of support from your father. And you mentioned the word shame. You felt a bit ashamed about what was happening. Why did you feel like that?
I guess it was a function of not knowing what was going on and naturally we associate our private organs and our physiology with shame when there's something wrong. I guess that's why I felt ashamed. I didn't have an educational experience at that point in time that made me feel extremely comfortable with my vulva, with my vagina. I didn't know how to name these things. I didn't understand how to look after myself properly. So I guess that's why I was experiencing shame.
Were your periods painful from the very beginning?
Yeah, I always had really debilitating cramps.
And did that mean that you had to miss school or miss lessons?
Frequently. Either miss school or just leave school when my period would come when I was at school. And it was just very difficult to concentrate on anything that was not the pain. I think if you have a painful period, your first few years of menstruation are the worst in terms of the intensity of the cramps. And I remember just laying in the bath or taking a really, really hot shower was the only thing that would help.
And did you use any painkillers or were you too young?
I think I was too young. And I also I couldn't access them myself, obviously, so I didn't know where to find them.
You were on your own in terms of your peer group, and then you found another girl who had got her period. And then did things change as soon as your other friends started to get their periods?
Yeah. By the time that my outer school friends started getting their periods, I think I had like 3 or 4 years of being the only girl with her period. So I had become more confident and become more aware of menstruation, what it meant and how to deal with it. So I actually kind of turned it into the cool thing at school. So after the second girl got her period, we created this little group, and then all of the other girls couldn't wait to get their period, so they could participate in like the circle of conversations about menstruation, and we would kind of proudly walk down the school halls and go and change our pads all at the same time in the bathrooms while there was another girl that was guarding the door. So yeah, we made it into the cool thing at school.
Oh, the periods became cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one way to kind of shift the idea of shame and to become more empowered by what was happening to your bodies.
Yeah.
And what was your education like at school? Having had the doctor at the emergency clinic tell you what was going on, then did that education continue at school?
I think the first time that I had a sexual and reproductive health education in any form was in biology class when I was 15. I may just not remember it, but I don't have a recollection of in primary school learning about menstruation, safe sex, etc. The school that I went to was actually very progressive. The primary school that I went to, we would call our teachers by their first names rather than by their last names or Miss or Mister. And we all kind of formed really close bonds and really close friendships with our professors, with our teachers, sorry, but I don't recall having a formal education. We did have Bible study, which at that time I found really interesting, but we didn't have a formal sex ed class that I can recall.
So how were you learning about it?
A lot of it was from books. So the school that I went to was very encouraging of people reading. We would have these like reading competitions where the coolest kid in school was the kid that could read over 90 words a minute. We had this like little competition. And we had a large library. And I read Lolita when I was in the 4th grade, or I read a lot of books that I shouldn't have read early on. And I learned about menstruation and just, I guess I learned my first sexual education from these books. And then obviously I discovered the internet. And discovered internet forums. And I remember just these like internet forums in Bulgaria in like mid 2000s. People were just so confused. There was like so much angst and so much worry, and people were always worried they were pregnant. I remember this girl from my class came to me just like crying in tears because she had had unprotected oral sex and she was convinced that she was pregnant, and that's, you know, that was just a fact for her, and we didn't know any better, so we were like, oh my god, commiserating with her being pregnant. Yeah,
it's interesting because the internet is supposed to be this democratizing force in terms of access, and
the internet is a democratizing force now. It's just when I was growing up, like we didn't have a computer. It was difficult for me to access the internet, and also you have to remember that I was accessing the Bulgarian internet, which is different from, you know, Bulgarian forums are different from forums that are maybe a bit more progressive that you would maybe find in the UK. And also the internet now, like the quality information about sexual, menstrual, and reproductive health that you can find online now has no points of comparison to the information that I was finding when I was between 10 and 15.
Right.
It's a very different internet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you thinking about what you know now, and thinking back to that girl who was looking on the internet and on these forums and trying to find out information about what was going on with her body, information about sexual health, what would you tell that girl?
Stick with it. It's going to get easier. You're going to learn the ropes and learn how to navigate menstruation, and you're going to come into your own and start feeling proud of who you are as a woman.
What point what was the starting point where you realized you were having these heavy and painful periods? When did you realize that something had to change?
I guess the thought was always at the back of my mind, this really strong belief that the way that people deal with their periods and the way we purchase period care products and how they perform is really subpar. When I became a teenager and when I started going to high school, my painful periods persisted. I started using ibuprofen and Nurofen and all of the pink period anti-inflammatories that are actually the exact same formulation as the generic ones, but only 5 times more expensive. They never really removed my cramps. They just dulled the cramps. So it was always this idea that menstruation could be made easier, and looking after yourself when you're on your period could be made nicer, was always in the back of my mind.
It could be made nicer. I think that's a important message for that a lot of women would like to hear. And so you had this message in the back of your mind, and now you have a company which helps women have nicer period. Tell us about the journey from having this seed of a thought in your mind to starting up your company.
I first had the idea for Daye when I was finishing an MBA type course in Bulgaria. It was an evening business education course. And in order to graduate, we had to come up with a business idea that would be socially impactful. So I started researching northern Bulgaria, which is an area that has the highest rates of unemployment in Europe, actually. Has really high levels of sexual trafficking. So I thought, okay, whatever business idea I could come up with that would somehow benefit this region in particular would be socially impactful for that reason. And I started researching the history of northern Bulgaria, and turns out northern Bulgaria used to be the number one producer and exporter of industrial hemp in the 40s and in the 30s, before the communist government came and took over. And northern Bulgaria had this industrial hemp research institute that was publishing a bunch of papers around industrial hemp. And I just went and I found these old papers, and I realized through them that industrial hemp's fibers are more absorbent than cotton, and the extract from the flower can be analgesic.